No matter where you live in a city, if it's summer, you're gonna feel the heat. Sure, AC helps. But what if one of the most natural ways to cool down a neighborhood is the one that comes at an unexpected price?
It's really hard to get trees into cities. Trees have to compete against utilities, against roads, against water mains, against driveways. Trees are really inundated with a lot of pressures, and believe it or not, getting a tree into the ground in a city is very challenging.
Dr. Vivek Shande studies the complex relationship between trees, the built environment, and communities in the face of climate change.
A tree can provide ecosystem services. One is obviously shade. When you're under a tree, you can really feel the air temperature difference between that shaded area and that not shaded area. The other thing that trees are doing is what we call transpiration. They're pulling up large volumes of water from the ground, and that allows the tree then to transpire through the leaves as well. And that changes the humidity around a tree.
So how do neighborhoods that look like this differ from ones like this?
These trees can really mediate temperatures in cities by upwards of 13, sometimes even 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Areas that have tree canopy tend to use less energy. That means their energy bills are lower.
How can a guy ever save any money?
We're also seeing the people living in neighborhoods with a lot of tree canopy are selling their homes and getting more money for the same home that would be in an area that has less tree canopy. So they're building wealth additionally through that process. And then, of course, we're seeing all the physiological effects on the human body. When temperatures go above 98.6 and we don't have an active way of cooling ourselves down, we end up running into an issue of being able to thermoregulate our bodies.
Total heart.
And that's why the most deaths that occur from natural hazard are from heat waves more than any other natural disaster.
But how did it get this way? For that, we've got to go back to a dark time in American history, when the country was struggling to bounce back from economic disaster.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Right after the Great Depression, there was a lot of interest in trying to enable communities to secure home loans. A lot of people were defaulting on their mortgages, so the federal government stepped in.
The New Deal was proclaimed a social revolution to lead the nation out of a Great Depression.
The New Deal was one of those unusual moments in U.S. history where any policy Franklin Delano Roosevelt would promulgate was passed by Congress and was made into law. And so one of those was this creation of the Home Owners Loan Corporation. That was the federal entity that allowed delineation of neighborhoods into variations of risk.
Emphasis on risk. The HOLC began drawing color-coded residential security maps of neighborhoods in over 200 cities, a practice later known as redlining.
Neighborhoods were characterized as one of four grades. A was considered, quote, the best grade. A B was considered still desirable. C was considered definitely declining. And then D was considered in the language as hazardous or very risky. And risk in that sense was often immigrant communities, African-American communities, people of color more generally, and then low-income communities. That grading created a segregation policy based on the color of their skin, more so than necessarily their ability to pay back the loans.
These unjust policies went beyond dividing cities. They also worsened existing environmental inequalities.
The buildings that really supported the Industrial Revolution, those were often sited in places where there was very low land values. And then with redlining came a greater level of disinvestment where parks weren't being sited in those locations, and often these industrial facilities or roadways were what were finding their way into those locations.
Don't tell us that this is the best that you can do in building cities.
So redlining came to an end in 1968 as a result of a number of major civil rights acts. And it was only very shortly after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated that we actually saw this major push by the federal government to abolish redlining.
The Fair Housing Act of 1968 officially banned discriminatory housing practices based on race, color, religion, or national origin. Those maps were put away, but the sharp lines drawn never truly disappeared.
Wealthier, wider neighborhoods consistently have 2, sometimes 3 times more canopy than communities of color in cities around the US. Some of these historical practices of planning and policy are making it far more difficult for a planner to make a case for planting trees in a C and D neighborhood because it's going to cost a lot more to tear up that concrete, get a tree into the ground, find ways to maintain it, and makes it really hard to get our trees into the ground.
As summers get hotter and longer due to climate change, communities, urban planners, and environmental justice leaders are focusing on how to cool down these neighborhoods.
So we're really trying to co-create, co-produce these spaces with communities, often working with community-based organizations to understand various ways in which trees and the built environment are affecting their health and well-being. Communities have been able to create such thriving, verdant, and incredibly safe and healthy spaces as a result of just getting their needs met and being able to be supported in that process.